Balochistan, Pakistan, is the largest province from which southwest of the country, with Quetta as its main capital. Islam is the predominant religion here, at least 99% rate per capita, even though it has a minority of Pashtuns and Pakistani Christians. Balochistan is indeed a thoroughfare between Afghanistan and India. According to a very sparse information, it is here where Abdul Basit Mahmud Abdul Karim would begin his childhood. Although he was born in Kuwait, his family would move back to Pakistan in the mid 1980s. Abdul Karim's father, Muhammad Abdul Karim, would be considered an Anjam. Arabic would mean that he would not be for his mother's tongue, but an illiterate. Very little information exists regarding Abdul Basit's childhood and his family, from where it is known, while living in Pakistan, was sent to the United Kingdom to further his education and escape the dirt roads of Balochistan, which was in the 1980s a neighborhood which catered to Mujahideen fighters arriving to train and become a Mujahid in the Afghan war against the Soviet invaders. It is also rumored here that Abdul Basit Karim would join the Muslim Brotherhood as well. He would also go by another name, a name that's much more nefarious and known to the public, Ramzi Youssef. Other notable family members would include Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who he regarded as his uncle, and whose family was not as obscure as Basit's. Ramzi Youssef's maternal uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, would claim Balochistan as his birthplace. His father, Sheikh Muhammad Ali Dawstan Baluchi, was a Deobandi imam who moved the family to Kuwait from Balochistan in the 1960s. His mother, Halima Muhammad, it is not known at what date she was born. It is not known also where Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was born. Some say March 1st, 1964. Others claim it's April 14th, 1965. In time, Ramzi Youssef will use an alias, and also Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. There are rumors during the first period of Youssef's life that the Central Intelligence Agency had recruited Youssef as part of its Operation Cyclone program, where the CIA had helped Afghan and Islamic Mujahideen fighters in training camps located in Peshawar and Islamabad, Pakistan. According to a 1995 Newsday article, quote, FBI officials also are considering a probe of whether the CIA had any relationship with Youssef, who fought with the CIA-funded Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1980s, end quote. Youssef went to study electrical engineering at the Swansea Institute in Wales. While on a semester break in 1988, Youssef arrived in Peshawar and began training in computer-aided electrical engineering. In 1989, he once returned back to Peshawar and began training at the Sada training camp for Afghan Mujahideen fighters. There, he learned how to manufacture explosive devices from Abu Jafar al-Kandari, who was also an explosive expert from the Jihad Wild training camp, which was located in Khost, Afghanistan. Jafar also trained another fellow Mujahideen, who just arrived to the camp in 1989, Ahmed Ajaj. Youssef graduated from Swansea in 1989, just before he began training at the Sada camp, operated under Afghan warlord and de facto head of the Northern Alliance, Abdul Rasul Sayyaf. Meanwhile, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had begun his fascination with the Afghan-Soviet War while listening to a speech given by Sayyaf in 1982. Sayyaf had declared a global jihad against the Soviet invaders, in which, much like his nephew Youssef, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed joined the Muslim Brotherhood. He was 16 at the time in 1983. The following year, he graduated high school and would travel to North Carolina to begin his studies for electrical engineering at North Carolina A&T. While at the university, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would be subjected to humiliating prejudices by fellow students. During morning and evening prayers, his shoes and sandals belonging to other fellow Muslims would be thrown in a nearby lake. Almost a weekly barrage of racial epithets and discrimination would enrage Khalid Sheikh Mohammed from within. He despised Americans because of their daily tortures. In 1986, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed received his bachelor's and would relocate back to Peshawar, but with a newfound zeal for revenge against his Western adversaries, where before his arrival to the United States, none existed. While in Peshawar, he would reunite with his older brother, Zahid al-Sheikh, who was fully involved with the Afghan-Soviet War. Zahid would introduce Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to Abdullah Azam, who would be known to almost everyone in the Middle East as the godfather of modern-day jihad. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would also begin working out of the Sada training camp operated out of Bazam. Immediately afterwards, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would begin working for Abdul Rasul Sayas magazine Al Bunyan Al Masrus. According to accounts from counterterrorism expert Rohan Guantanara, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would travel to the Philippines in 1991 at the behest of Saudi national and Soviet Afghan hero Osama bin Laden to train members of the militant group Abu Sayyaf and the Moral Islamic Liberation Front in bomb making and assassinations. He worked with bin Laden's brother-in-law, Muhammad Jamal Khalifa, to establish an operational base there and also in Malaysia. Khalifa is bin Laden's brother-in-law and has numerous businesses in the Philippines. It is here that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would be considered a valuable asset to bin Laden personally. In 1993, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would marry and relocate to Qatar. Yusuf would then complete his training from Abu Jafar al-Gandari at the Sada training camp, even though, according to Jafar, Yusuf was not that impressionable in bomb making. Ajaj was, however, better suited at it. Ajaj, along with Yusuf, would then travel to the mountainous Patkia province near Tora Bora, Afghanistan, to train in explosives at the Kaldin camp. The camp was run by a Saudi, Khalid Suleiman Jaid al-Hubayishi. The camp was at odds with al-Qaeda, however, which differed in their religious ideology and was at odds with Osama bin Laden due to al-Hubayishi's insistence that bin Laden not kill civilians during his jihad against the West. The Taliban would notice the division between the two and force the camp to be shut down by the summer of 2000. Meanwhile, a local imam at the Al Farouk Mosque located in Brooklyn, New York City, Omar Abdul Rahman, would begin planning to bomb Jewish neighborhoods and other high-valued American targets under the assistance of El Sayed Nosser, who was also a follower of Rahman from Egypt. Both men are known to be terrorists in Egypt. Rahman was also known as the Blind Sheikh. He is also the de facto head of Gamma Islamiyah, one of the primary terrorist groups organizing terrorist activities against the Egyptian government. Rahman had tapped a personal bodyguard of his to construct bombs due to the main previous experience in the Special Armed Forces while in Egypt. The man's name was Imad Salem. Salem was working as an undercover informant for the New York Joint Terrorism Task Force and the FBI supervised by Nancy Floyd. But the FBI had pulled Salem out of the operation. It left a void for Rahman, who called Abdullah Azam in Peshawar, according to numerous news articles. The recommendation for a replacement? Ramzi Youssef. Both Youssef and Ajad would then leave the country for Pakistan, and on August 31st, 1992, using the services of a local Pakistan travel agent, board Pakistan International Airlines Flight 703 to Karachi and then to JFK Airport in New York City. Ajad and Youssef together had 5 passports and numerous documents supporting their aliases, a Saudi passport showing signs of alteration, and an Iraqi passport bought from a Pakistani official, a photograph-substituted Swedish passport, a photo-substituted British passport, a Jordanian passport, identification cards, bank records, education records, and as well as a medical record. While awaiting at JFK's secondary immigration inspection, Ajad would produce a crudely made passport in which he would state that he was Swedish. The passport was legitimate. It was belonging to a Swedish citizen who had attended a training camp in Pakistan and surrendered his identity cards to those who ran the camp. But Ajad had used simple paste to plaster his own photograph over the legitimate owner. The inspectors noticed it right away and held Ajad along with his belongings that when inspectors found inside was quite revealing. While in an INS visiting room, inspectors Mark Cozine and Robert Malafront would look inside Ajad's suitcase and found the following: bomb-making manuals, videos and other materials on assembling weapons and explosives assembly, letters referencing his attendance at the terrorist training camp, anti-American and anti-Israeli materials, and instructions on document forgery, as well as 2 rubber stamp devices to alter the seal on passports issued from Saudi Arabia. Included in one of the manuals was a very interesting document which was written in 1982. It had the title Al Qaeda, which would mean that 7 years prior to the group's formation, it was used in a context many years before it was even acknowledged as a group. INS immediately called the FBI's Terrorism Task Force and the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Unit. Both agencies declined to get involved in this incident. Ajad would be held in a detention center pending his situation by New York courts on what to do with him. Yusuf, however, saw what was happening with Ajad. Yusuf proceeds an Iraqi passport bearing a visa issued by the Pakistani embassy in Baghdad before an INS officer. Yusuf would request for political asylum. He would be held and questioned by INS for 3 days. The INS officer who inspected Yusuf upon arrival requested he not enter the country, but due to overcrowding on his detention cells, he was given a future date for court regarding his situation. To Yusuf's surprise, he was freed, and although he had little to no money, he managed to pick up a taxi ride into New Jersey by a Pakistani taxi driver who showed pity to Yusuf's plight. The ride was free of charge. Yusuf would arrive at the Al Farouk Mosque in Brooklyn a short while later. He would sleep inside its makeshift rooms on a cot. Ajad, meanwhile, would be closely investigated while being held, and according to Robert Freeman of the Village Voice, whose article, Mossad linked to WTC bombing suspect, Ajad was reunited and recruited by the Israeli Mossad. Quote, the FBI had identified Ajad as a senior Intifada activist in the occupied territories, having close ties to both El Fatah, a constituent group of the Palestine Liberation Organization, and Hamas, a Palestinian Islamic fundamentalist organization. But according to Kol Arahir, a highly regarded Hebrew language weekly in Jerusalem, Ajad was never involved in Intifada activities or with the PLO or even Hamas. Citing court papers and other sources, Kol Har says that far from being a political activist, Ajad was actually a small-time crook who was arrested in 1988 for counterfeiting U.S. dollars. Ajad and 2 other members of his counterfeiting ring ran a printing press in an Arab cemetery outside East Jerusalem, housing their equipment in the same building where religious Muslims wash corpses before burial. When Israeli police raided the cemetery, they arrested Ajad, who was holding some 100,000 of bogus U.S. currency. Another gang member was carrying an antiquated pistol. Ajad was convicted for counterfeiting and sentenced to 2.5 years. It was during his stay in prison that Mossad's Israeli CIA apparently recruited him, say Israeli intelligence sources. By the time he was released after having serving just 1 year, he had seemingly undergone a radical transformation. The common crook had become a devout Muslim and hardline nationalist. Soon after, he was arrested for smuggling weapons into the West Bank, allegedly for al-Fatah, end quote. From September 1992 onward, Yusuf would continue to remain in contact with Ajad even though he was incarcerated. Ajad never contacted Yusuf directly. Calls were purchased and patched through Big Five hamburgers in Dallas from associates that Ajad knew, as Ajad once had residency in Houston and worked as a pizza delivery driver while he was living inside the United States. After he was released from prison by Israeli authorities, Ajad would remain busy assisting Yusuf in constructing a bomb which would now be used in an attack inside the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The operation would be known only to Yusuf and Rahman. Through the luck that followed Yusuf from inside an INS detention cell, it would follow him to Brooklyn by way of a cab ride to the Al Farouk Mosque, where he would replace Imad Salem as the constructor of a bomb which would later be placed in a Ryder truck on the cold morning of February 26, 1993. Ajad was released from prison March 1st, just 3 days after the World Trade Center bombing. Yusuf would flee to Pakistan, while Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was living in Qatar. The citizens of New York City and elsewhere in the United States wouldn't be as lucky from hereafter, as the terrorist activities of Ramzi Yusuf, Omar Abdul Rahman, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, with the intelligence services, domestic and foreign, act as a watchful eye from near and afar, would witness the complete and utter destruction of the World Trade Center towers, not just in 1993, but on September 11, 2001, it would give the world a makeshift conversion into an Orwellian nightmare for all of time.